Welcome everyone. Tonight begins the first in a new series of programs provided by the Greater Dayton Area League of Women Voters in partnership with our friends at DATV. We're calling this new series LWV Empowering You, designed to provide unbiased, nonpartisan information on issues that are relevant and important to our friends and neighbors throughout the Greater Dayton area. I am Erin O'Brien, a member of the League of Women Voters, and your host for this evening as we discuss tonight's topic, the 2020 Census. Our guests in this discussion are Kathy Rowell, Professor of Sociology at Sinclair Community College, Nikol Miller, Coordinator of the Montgomery County Census, and Gabriela Pickett-Mosier of Welcome Dayton. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So I'll begin tonight with Kathy. So how did you become so interested and knowledgeable about the census?
So I'm a sociologist by training, so that's what we do in sociology. So in fact, the University of Michigan is probably the biggest research center on the census. And there's a group of us from Sinclair that have been fortunate enough to go up there to study actually how to use the census to teach students. So it's a big part of what I've done historically. We actually have a group of faculty at our college that actually know how to use this in the classroom. So counting people is kind of what we do for a living. So the census is one of the biggest counts of people actually in the world. And it's, I was really happy to come to talk about the census.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about what is a census and why it's so important?
Yeah. So the first census in the United States took place in 1790. And there was a plan then that we should do it every 10 years. And there were other countries that have done census before us. It becomes really important. What I say, it's not just to count people, it's also the way that we allocate resources in this country. So it becomes so important for people to participate, and increasingly people don't want to, they don't like to, they don't want to be bothered. But it's not just how many people live in this country, but it's who they are, where they live. And it's the major way the federal government, and in many ways the state and local governments, allocate resources. So it becomes so important for all citizens to consider and to take the census.
Okay, thank you. So Nikol, as the coordinator for the Montgomery County Census, can you tell us a little bit about how you're preparing for the census?
So what we've started since May of last year, it's actually the Dayton and Montgomery County Complete Count Committee is what our formal name is. It's a joint venture between the Montgomery County as well as the city of Dayton in an effort to do outreach. They've formed by resolution from both the city and the county, this committee, and they've named people to the committee, which are representative of a lot of stakeholders from a vast cross-section throughout the community. There's like business representation, education, philanthropic representation. There are community organizations that are involved, and it's just on and on, those types of organizations. So what we're doing right now is we're ramping up, because this right now is what we're calling our education phase. And so we'll be conducting workshops, doing outreach through to the different trusted voices throughout the Dayton, Montgomery County area.
Very nice.
To make sure that they're educated on what the census is in hopes, to create some motivation at the top of the year, 2020, so that when the census the questionnaire is mailed or the postcard is mailed, then by April 1st, there's some excitement, enthusiasm, about people cooperating and participating in the census. And then we also are preparing for when the census takers have to go out in the field to knock on doors to generate another awareness program so that people understand that this is safe, it's easy, it's something that you should participate. And primarily we're just trying to localize the message so that people can understand what's at stake, for them, what this means for them to participate in the census.
Sure, okay. Thank you. And can you tell me, when will the forms be mailed?
So there will be by March, I should say. It'll start in March, and actually I was just in a meeting today, so I think I have the most up-to-date information. By March, there will be a postcard that will be mailed with a unique user ID that people can log online to complete the questionnaire. Starting towards the end of March, there will also be a form mailed to some residents or some households where they have made some determinations that that access to the internet may be low in those areas. So there will be a form mailed. We don't know specifically here, those areas And but then there's also the option to call by phone and complete the questionnaire. So you can do it online, by phone, as well as mail in a questionnaire.
And that's kind of new this year, right?
Yes, the telephone as well as the online aspect of it. This is the first time it will be conducted in a census.
Wonderful. Okay. And Gabriela, you are on the board of Welcome Dayton. So can you first explain a little bit about the mission of Welcome Dayton?
Welcome Dayton is an initiative of the city that is intended to connect our immigrant community with services and resources that are available to the community, and also to celebrate the diversity that we have in the city, and trying to educate the public about the importance of having people come to Dayton, because there's a lot of benefits to it, not only culturally but also economically.
Oh, okay. So what are some of the advantages of being an immigrant welcome city?
I think we are more likely to have businesses. People who come from other countries tend to have more, start new businesses.
Yes.
And they also are buying houses that are dilapidated, and they're trying to renovate them. And so it's really reviving neighborhoods that are that were affected by the crisis of 2008.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And so, how many different populations do we have here in Dayton, would you say?
I'm not sure that I know that,
Okay.
but I do know that we have an important number of Turkish communities, Latino communities as well. We have people from Iraq, and also a lot from Central African countries like Burundi, Tanzania, Rwanda.
That's wonderful that we have that here in Dayton. So can I ask you, what steps will Welcome Dayton take to kind of assist and encourage our immigrant community to participate in the census?
One of the things that we're working on is partnering with the Ohio Commission for Latin Affairs. And there's going to be a campaign called Hágase Contar, Count Me In. And this is organized by the National Association of Latino Democratic Official Education Fund, and it is intended to connect with the leadership of the community, with school boards, with educators, with childcare providers and parents, so that they are aware of all the resources that we have, so that we can tell our communities that not only it's desirable, but it's really important for them to be part of the census. We have about 1 million children under the age of 5 that were not counted in 2010. And that becomes problematic because they need services like the CHIP, WIC program, Head Start, Title I funding, funding for special education services and children with exceptionalities. And so when you talk about the Latino community, having 62% of their children in near or in poverty levels, they're the ones that will need the most services. And so if they're not counted, then there's $20 billion that are allocated to serve children under the age of 5.
Wow, that is really important. So will the census be available in different languages?
I don't know that.
Yes, it will be.
It will be?
It will
Okay.
be, yes. They have it, and I believe it's in 10 different languages right now, but the Questionnaire Assistance Center has a multitude of languages that they're able, once you call, they're able to offer or completing the questionnaire via phone.
Okay, that's wonderful. So Nikol, how old do you have to be to participate in the census?
Well, the census is done by household, so it's the count of every person in the nation. So, so they'll go to the household, or I'm sorry, that's when they go, the census takers come. But essentially, whoever is the head of household or someone in the household, they start the questionnaire and they complete it, identifying everyone who lives within that household. So everyone, there's not an age, 0 years old. As long as you are living and breathing on U.S. soil as of April 1st, 2020, then you should be counted in the 2020 census.
Wow, okay. And are the questions like fill in the blank, fill in a circle?
Yes, most of them are if I recall correctly, most of them you complete, basic information.
Okay.
There are some, check the boxes, like when it comes to race and ethnicity.
Okay.
But there's also the element that I think an option to add, like an other category.
Okay.
And things like that. So yeah, so it's a combination, but the census has tested these, questionnaires to see which ones are the best way to ask questions and to complete it and get the answers or the data sets that they need in order to deliver services to our country.
Okay, wonderful. And I know a lot of people are wondering how long it takes to fill out the census.
Well, so it's interesting because I was looking at the language and it's easy and convenient, and you can do it, while you're sitting in your home. Last decennial, it was 10 questions, 10 minutes,
Okay.
So it's that it's not a long, complicated form. It's just basic information. I don't want to confuse you, but there used to be the long form that was conducted, I think, in 1 in every 6 households. And so that's now supplemented by the American Community Survey. So you don't have to get into that laborious detail of information that used to be part of the sample during the decennial.
Okay. And can people skip questions, or do they need to answer every question?
Well, they would strongly encourage you to answer every question, but definitely you can skip, but it'll be more of a complete data set if you complete every question.
Certainly. Okay. All right. So, Kathy, we're going to go back to you. Can you tell us a little bit about how the census has changed throughout the years with regard to our increasing multiracial cultures?
Yeah. So as a sociologist, I think for me it's been one of the most fascinating things to study. And if people are interested, the National Archives host all the past census, and you can actually look at how the race question has evolved over time. The very first census, 1790, included a categorization of race. It's become the major way our government has played a role in how we categorize race. And I really appreciate and really want to encourage people. I know how people feel about being asked that question sometimes, even my own classes at Sinclair, but it becomes really important to complete the race question. And the newest sort of evolved situation with race is we now allow for people to be multiracial. It turns out people always have been multiracial, but now the government officially recognizes that.
Yeah.
So race is a little different. It's the same as in 2010.
Okay.
There was some thoughts, I think actually former President Obama wanted to change it, and I think his reasoning is actually pretty good if you want to read it, and a lot of people agree with him. But there's also reasons to keep the current system so we can see if anything's changed since 2010. So right now it's a 2-part question.
Okay.
The first part asks about Hispanic origins, and that's because the United States government sees ethnicity and race separately. Then the second question is where you do race, and I think the race question is really interesting. You can choose more than one box, and I really recommend for people who identify as multiracial to please consider doing that.
Okay.
I also really hope that people do answer that question. So you have an option to pick your race, but then you also can check more than one box. And for every race you identify, you can put your country of origin. So it is the one area where you do have an opportunity to write who you are.
Okay.
And why is this important? Why do we need this information? This is how we know whether or not there's inequality in our country. Okay. So first of all, the Voting Rights Act. This is a way that we can measure inequality in treatment and discrimination for people to vote. We use this for health disparity. We use this for fair housing. We use this for educational outcomes. And we also use it to distribute basically educational funding. And then it's also how we end up giving money to various tribes in this country. So it's a tough thing. We did find last census that younger people were more likely to identify that they were multiracial, but it was a really low amount. Because that's not how we've talked about race in our country. We do expect with the 2020 census to see a huge increase in the numbers of people who identify as multiracial. So that part takes a little time, and if you have a lot of people in your household of multiple ethnicities and race, which increasingly families do, it takes time. I just want to recommend there's a really good fact sheet at Georgetown Law on why you might want to consider completing all of this and why it's important. I hope people really look at it.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that information. So what does an accurate census mean for the community?
I think in the end it talks about resources, right? So if we don't have an accurate census, we could potentially lose out on federal funding and state funding as well. So it's the major way that we divvy up financial resources in our country. So the census becomes so important to communities. And I really appreciate all the work that we do in our community. Some communities have a harder time than I think we do. Like in bigger cities, this is a very difficult task.
Yeah.
I'm really thankful for how Dayton and Montgomery counties handling it. And I think that it just becomes so important. And increasingly, people don't complete surveys, right? So I even have students, I deal with a college student population, why do we need to do this? But whether you like it or not, I mean, there's people who have, I could probably give a good critique of the census, which I will not do. Whether you like it or not, it's how we decide resources for our community. So I really hope people in our community take the time to complete the survey, and complete it accurately becomes really important.
Wonderful.
And not to interject, but I just want to make sure, and like you talk about resources, but there is a hard number that is identified. It's $700 billion that's distributed annually based on, census numbers at this point. Like that, in all likelihood, increases throughout the decade. Like this is also the baseline for, how money is distributed, over the next 10 years. So it's important to have an accurate count now, because agencies, like I shamelessly, put a plug in for my employer. I work for the Transit Authority here in Dayton, Greater Dayton RTA, and we're looking at how people are starting to age in place, and how does mobility and transportation, how do you plan in the future of mobility and transportation, or for that matter, younger people who don't want to drive anymore. It's like, so we have to, agencies and entities, they use it to plan for the future as well.
Right. It sounds like there's a whole lot at stake.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
I think there's a study out of George Washington University that says the number here in Ohio is an average of like 1820. That every person is worth 1820 each year. So you multiply that number, and over a 10-year period, you multiply that what the current population is, and you kind of get a sense of how much money comes back to your community based on, the census count.
Right. So we want to make sure everybody gets counted. That makes a lot of sense. So Kathy, I was going to ask you too. There was a question in the news earlier in the year about whether or not there would be a citizenship question in the census. So to clarify, will there be a citizen question on the census? And why or why not did the Citizenship Committee decide on that?
So my understanding, and you can also help me with this too, is no.
Okay.
The current decision right now is to not ask that question. Historically, we've never asked that question.
Okay.
And when you actually look at the law and why we have a census, it says to count all people living within the borders of the United States. So it did not ever say it had to be citizens, because it's important. No matter how you feel about immigration or undocumented immigrants in our community, we have visitors here too as well that are here on visas and various other things, and they still use services in our community, and we need to know who they are.
Right.
So all the original plans for census never used the word citizen, it used people.
Okay.
And the intent right now, I think, is to not include that question. Now I do know that they did test the question of citizenship, and there were some tests done by the U.S. Census to test whether or not they had a question that would work for that, and it concerned some people. But I think as of today, I looked at some reports as well, there's no intent, but you can probably speak to that too.
You have it, you've captured it, there's no intent to.
Okay. So it did seem, with that test, did it show whether or not it discouraged people from answering accurately that question or not? I think that was kind of one of the things they were concerned with.
Yeah, so basically it's the same thing with the race question. Whenever we change questions and ask things that seem political in nature, right? People get concerned and they just don't fill out those questions.
Sure.
So even if that were changed, people just are not going to answer the question then.
Right.
And that's the same thing when we first, every time we've change the race and origin question. There's a population who just chooses not to answer that out of concerns of how this might be used politically.
Sure.
So I don't see that we're going to add that. But there were some concerns. There was a time period when the Census Bureau was testing that question, and they still have a question out there that you can look at. But I don't see it being added as of today.
Well, I probably for probably a primary reason would be that at this point they have to print the questionnaires, you know. So it's kind of a a hard date in which they have to pull that trigger. Otherwise, the census won't be able to be taken in a timely and cost-effective manner.
Okay.
And I think that the fact that the citizenship question was raised in the political climate that we're experiencing right now makes it a little bit more difficult for us to go out and tell people, that they need to fill out the questionnaire, that is important. Before, we had challenges from the Latino community filling out the form because they live in hard-to-count places, like, they have like multi apartments where it's difficult to count who lives there, and also the family structure of the Latino community being multi-generational, highly with high mobility, and complex relationships makes it very difficult for them to actually know who to count and who not to count. And certainly now we have the another dilemma, which is aside from trying to fix these problems to make sure everybody's counted, that they feel comfortable and that they know that the census is just strictly statistical data that is used for allocating resources.
Sure. So since you work with the immigrant population here in town, is there something that would help people feel more comfortable in answering that question? Is that a conversation that you may have with them?
Yes, and we're talking with Welcome Dayton and the Human Relations Council, to have meetings with the leaders of the Latino community to make sure that that this message is conveyed to everybody.
Sure, on how it will be used and used
Right.
accurately.
Right.
That's wonderful. So, in following up, I guess, so when does the census have to be returned?
So the questionnaire, you can start taking the questionnaire in March of 2020. The online, I guess this option will still be, but canvassers or census takers will come out through September of 2020. It'll be a time period, I think it's between May and September of 2020, because then after that, the numbers have to be delivered to the President of the United States by December 31st, 2020. So, and then they're released for redistricting purposes by April 1st, 2021.
Okay. And so I know we touched on this briefly earlier, but is there a fine if you don't fill it in or if it's not completed?
There is a law, but it's never been enforced. Is that accurate?
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard it's never been enforced. So no, but census, they're kind of very aggressive, and you can probably make them comparable to bill collectors. They're going to keep coming until they get an answer. So
Right, and that makes sense considering what's at stake. I think hopefully people, once they understand what is at stake, maybe they're more likely to fill it in. So as for the information in the census, is it confidential?
It's confidential. It's protected by Title 13. The information can't be shared with any other entities. So if there's a concern about the IRS or some other law enforcement agency, it's protected under Title 13 that it can't be shared. And then it's not once the data is released, it's not released in a manner that can identify that Nikol Miller lives at this house. But that information is released 72 years later. So after this decennial, we will have the results from the 1950 census available to look at. So a lot of people who are into genealogy can trace their ancestors, where they were in that snapshot of history, where they lived, who they were living with, and all those kinds of things.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is interesting. So no identifiable information is released until 72 years
for 72
later.
years, correct.
Okay. Interesting. All right. And I guess, and does anyone have any final words that they want to say today before we finish?
I don't know. I mean, I have a personal plea. One, the Census Bureau has their outreach staff who've come to Dayton, or they've been hired. They're hired locally. I shouldn't say they come to Dayton because they are people who live in our community, and they've been out meeting with the different organizations. I just met with them for the first time on Friday,
Okay.
and I've been in 3 meetings with them already,
Wow.
just since Friday. So they're here. They're willing to partner with any organization just to make sure that, and it doesn't have to be, a big organization. It can be a small organization, because what we want to do is make sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate and everyone is counted. So there will be, they're here. We're getting ready to launch a series of educational workshops coming up. They're in the planning process
great.
right now, but look for them in the fall,
That's
so that we
great.
can get our strategy is to get trusted voices at a multitude of layers, whether it's, when you go into bank, there's a census message there. When you go to church, the pastor or, the faith leader, is delivering a census message. In the schools, your children may be sent home with some, census message. So we want to have multi-layers of census messaging so that people will understand the importance. And that's not even including what the national campaign will be as well. So there'll probably be a lot of flooding of your commercials. Who watches commercials anymore? But there'll be a lot of outreach or media attention around this as well.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I worked in this for the census back in the 2010 census. But this is the first time that I will have experienced it also during a presidential election cycle. So I'm really curious to see, how those two interact with each other.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Yeah.
Well,
And I just want to encourage people to educate themselves as
Right.
well. The Census has an amazing website, and the Pew Foundation has an amazing website on the Census with the history. And it's really interesting to look at the National Archives where they're all housed. When I was a college student, you didn't have access to these things. So I think they're really fascinating. Educate yourself so that you know how it's used. And today there's so many great resources. And it's also really fun. There's a timeline that you can study of the census that's available online at the Census Bureau. So they do a really great job of dissemination, and it's information about your country. So I encourage people to really take time to look at it.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to thank everyone for being here today. So thank you, Kathy, Nikol, and Gabriela. And thank you all for being in our viewing audience, for watching the LWV Empowering You. The League of Women Voters encourages everyone to participate in the 2020 census for the benefit of your community and for the state of Ohio. If you have any further questions about this or upcoming programs, you can contact the League by emailing league@lwvdayton.org or calling our office at 937-228-4041. Have a great evening and good night.